Hello, my name is Ashley Van Bemmelen, and I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about ethics in research. So this presentation would be applicable to anyone who's working through a research methodology course in a master's level counseling program or another related field. So to take a look at what we're going to cover in this short presentation, first we're going to look at why research, especially in the field of counseling. Why is it necessary to be a researcher, to be involved in research, or at least be able to be a good consumer of research? We're going to talk about experiments that outline the need for ethics. We're going to look at ethical values for research, some principles from the ACA, and then some resources for further reading if this is a topic that's of interest for you. So let's get started. Why research? As counselors, why do we need to be good producers and consumers of research? If you're able to pause this presentation and come up with a few examples on your own, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll jump in to name a few. So the first being to advance the field of counseling. As a field, we don't want to stay stagnant. So we think about helping others and with the problems that they have or the problems they present in counseling. It's changing all the time as our society changes, as our cultures change. So even thinking about in counseling 10 years ago compared to today, 10 years ago, we didn't need research on virtual or online counseling. Today, it's absolutely imperative that we have some data that looks at whether online or virtual counseling can have the same benefit of face-to-face counseling. So as the field grows, we want to stay up to date with it and make advances as needed. Some therapies begin to kind of become more outdated while others hold up to more empirical testing. So with this, kind of thinking about as counselors, many of us are going to be billing insurance companies when we graduate and work in private group practice or at a social service agency. And with that, insurance companies are going to want to know that the therapies you're providing in session are empirically based. They're not going to want a bill for 3 to 5 sessions a week for a psychoanalytic program that you're working with a counselor, when maybe there's a solution-focused method or a cognitive behavioral method that would provide more speedy results and has more empirical backing. So you want to stay up to date with what the empirically based therapies are in our field and to continue finding therapies that offer the most success for the specific clients that we're seeing. And then research allows therapists to gain continued competency in multicultural understanding. So most therapies created in the history of counseling, when we think of Freud, Piaget, Beck, Pearls, a lot of the individuals we talk about when we learn counseling theory were specifically middle to upper class Caucasian men. And so the therapies that they designed were probably normed on a specific socioeconomic, cultural, racial group. And so we want to think about therapies that are created and normed for the specific populations that we work with. And especially if we're working with more women or more multicultural populations, learning about therapies like relational cultural theory from the Stone Center that provides a relational cultural emphasis of how women grow in and through relationships, a therapy that really focuses on our cultural or heritage, our background, and uses that as a strength-based method for therapy. So research provides us some continued multicultural competency, which is so necessary in our field. So now let's move into just taking a look at a couple of the experiments for the sake of time that really provide a foundation for why we need ethical principles to guide our research. So the first here is rebirthing therapy. So we're going to talk about the story of Candace. Candace is a 10-year-old girl in Colorado who bounced back and forth between foster homes before being adopted by the Newmaker family. Candace struggled to attach to Mrs. Newmaker, and the new mother was desperate to find a connection and feel bonded with her new daughter. For this reason, she sought therapy. This story or this type of case is not uncommon. I mean, you could see a Candace or a Mrs. Newmaker in your office. Many families that have an experience with adoption may eventually seek out counseling resources to help build a strong relationship and a strong foundation in the family. So as this family sought out therapy, they unfortunately were not met with help, but were actually met with significant harm. The therapist that Mrs. Newmaker found to work with had read about reactive attachment disorder and had some understanding of it. She'd learned about holding therapy, where families hold, hug, snuggle the child that they're trying to build a connection with. And she'd also read about rebirthing therapy that was put forth in the 70s by a psychologist. So what rebirthing therapy does is it simulates the process of a child coming through the birth canal and being born to the new family. So they try to simulate uterine contractions where they push on the child's wrapped in blankets with pillows around them and people pushing, and they have to kind of climb out of the simulated birth canal. So Candace's mother, desperate for help, agreed to this new therapy as an effort to save her family. During the 70-minute session, which is actually available on video, I believe if you're interested. It's quite graphic, so I'm not going to show it with this presentation, but I believe it's available in the New York Times. During the 70-minute session, Candace can be seen crying, screaming, saying she cannot breathe, saying she's fearful that she's going to die. And the therapist continued to prompt her to climb out of the blankets, the pillows, the body's pushing down on her. After 40 minutes, Candace, her body goes limp and she stops making noise. And they continue prompting her and trying to get her to move forward. This continues for another 30 minutes with no response from Candace. At that point, they start pulling the blankets off of her and find that she's unconscious and without a pulse. Within the next 24 hours, Candace passed away from injuries. So this is just a kind of strikingly devastating example of counseling practice without research and definitely without ethical principles guiding the work that's being done. So this serves as a reminder to all of us as counselors that we are learning counseling theory, technique, and ethics for a reason. That though we bring our own personality and our own understanding of the situation to each session, that we're not just flying by the seat of our pants as we do therapy. We are gauging everything that we do and grounding it in theory and technique and ethical principle. Next, we have Milgram's study. And this is probably one of the most famous studies in all of psychology. Maybe you've heard of it or are already familiar with it. It was carried out by Stanley Milgram in 1961 to 63. Stanley was a psychologist at Yale, and he wanted to look at the conflict between obedience to authority and personal consciousness. So he was really curious to understand how individuals in war could commit such heinous crimes. So he'd lived through the Nazi slaughter of the Jews and the Nuremberg war criminal trials, where they looked at all the experimentation that had been done on individuals. And Milgram observed that throughout history, soldiers have followed orders, even when those orders have been to slaughter innocent civilians. So the defensive soldiers, or those acting under instruction, the doctors in the Nuremberg trials, was this kind of idea or defense of obedience, that they were just following the orders of their superiors. So Milgram wanted to kind of create a study that would test this. So he put an advertisement in a newspaper and found 40 male participants. he paired them with one other person. One was the learner in the experiment, one was the teacher, or the student and the teacher, as you can see from the diagram on the screen. Only the student was always one of Milgram's associates. So that was always the student, and the learner was one of the 40 participants rotating through. So what happened is the learner was taken into a room and had electrodes attached to his arms, and the teacher and the researcher or experimenter went into the room next door, and this room contained an electrical shock generator with a row of switches marked from 15 volts, slight shock, 375 volts, danger, severe shock, to 450 volts, which was just marked by an XXX. So Milgram wanted to see how far participants would go in shocking the learners when wrong answers were given to questions. So the learner had been told to answer one question correctly and then 3 wrong, one question correctly and then 3 wrong. And what you can see is by the time the shock got to 315 volts, the learner is pounding on the wall there, and the teacher or participant can't see the individual, but can hear the screams and the cries for help. And so the teacher, the subject, often looked at the experimenter for help. Like, what do? I don't know if I can keep doing this. It feels like I'm hurting somebody. And the experimenter had 4 prompts to read through. The first being, please continue or please go on. Second, the experiment requires that you continue. Third, it's absolutely essential that you continue. And fourth, you have no other choice. You must go on. So participants did begin quitting the experiment after about 300 volts. One individual said, I think he's trying to communicate. He's knocking. It's not fair to shock the guy. These are terrific bolts. I don't think this is very humane. Oh, I can't go on with this. No, it isn't right. It's a hell of an experiment. This guy is suffering in there. No, I don't want to go on. This is crazy. At that point, the subject refused to administer more shock. A second individual said, he's banging in there. I'm going to chicken out. I'd like to continue, but I just can't do that to a man. I'm sorry, I can't do that to a man. It'll hurt his heart. You take your check. No, really, I can't do it. So in these, you can hear a little bit that the subjects were frequently kind of agitated and even angered. They were nervous that they were hurting somebody. But of the 40 individuals that went through this, 26 obeyed the orders of the experimenter up till the very end, up to that 450 volt shock, which was 2 steps beyond danger, severe shock. So although they continue to administer shocks, they did often present under extreme stress or duress. And some did stop around that 300, 350, 375 volt level because they had extreme fear that they were hurting or even killing somebody. So while this experiment taught us a lot about obedience to people in power, there's also a lot of concerns with it. And so if you kind of put yourself in the position of somebody who's reviewing potential research, maybe you're on an institutional review board, or you're reviewing research for publication. If you saw something like this today, what concerns would you have? What suggestions would you have for Milgram to change or adjust the experiment to handle the duress or stress that this is putting the participants under? So to help you answer those questions, we're going to move into looking at some ethical principles that will guide our future work and our future research. The preamble to the ACA Code of Ethics provides us the following 6 principles to guide all we do as counselors, as well as all we do as consumers and producers of research. So these 6 principles include autonomy, respect for persons. This is the idea that addresses independence. So allowing individuals the freedom to choose what therapy they're going to participate in, whether or not they complete the homework, whether or not they want the type of theory or technique that you provide, and whether or not they want to participate in any research offered to them. So to really make their own decisions. And counselors and researchers have the ability to help with two things. First, helping the client understand how their decision may or may not be received within the context of society, how much it would impact the rights of others. And the second consideration is related to the client's ability to make the decision. So a person's not capable of making decisions, either because they're minors, or maybe they have some type of cognitive delay or disability. These individuals should not be allowed to act on decisions that could cause harm to themselves or others. They don't have the ability to consent to harm. Non-malfeasance. As counselors, as researchers, that we cannot take any action that would harm clients. So this looks at kind of that main principle of above all, do no harm. That as we're working with anybody, we're thinking about how to not inflict any type of intentional harm, but also just not engaging in any activities that may harm the client or may negatively impact them or their families. Beneficence reflects the counselor's responsibility to contribute to the welfare of the client. So this is simply stated as to do good, to be proactive in doing good and helping to benefit the client. Justice. This looks at treating individuals equitably and with fairness. To think about distributing the risks and benefits of research fairly throughout the populations. For counseling research, we often find ourselves gathering the population that we have the easiest access to. So this is probably within a city or within a college environment. College students have a lot of research normed on them. And then we have to ask if we're completely leaving out rural areas in our research. Is that fair? Are we providing individuals with equal opportunity? And when we decide to provide someone with an advantage for research or for information because of where they are or why they have access, are we doing this in a way that's acknowledging it and trying to look for ways to benefit maybe the more disadvantaged rural populations, non-college students, and so on? So if an individual is being treated differently, the counselor needs to have a rationale for why that is, and explain the necessity and appropriateness of treating an individual differently or a group or a population. Fidelity, keeping our promises. This involves the notion of loyalty, faithfulness, honoring commitments. Clients need to be able to trust the counselor and have faith in the therapeutic relationship in order to grow. And this is true in research as well. Individuals participating in our research need to believe that we're doing this in their best interest and that we are going to keep our promises to them. And then veracity, dealing truthfully. That as we're sharing the benefits and harms of counseling or of the research that we're doing it truthfully, that we are being as honest as we're able to do within the integrity of the research. And then we have in the ACA, outside of the preamble, there's an entire section that addresses how to research in an ethical way. So there's a lot more points than I have on this slide, but I just wanted to touch on 4 of them, as well as the introduction to this section. It states, counselors who conduct research are encouraged to contribute to the knowledge base of the profession and promote a clearer understanding of conditions that lead to a healthy and more just society. Counselors support the effort of researchers by participating fully and willingly whenever possible. Counselors minimize bias and respect diversity in designing and implementing research. So you hear some of the principles from that preamble reflected in that. And then 4 pieces from that section that I found is very helpful. The first is confidentiality, that as we do research, that we're responsible for maintaining confidentiality of the participants and their records, that we take precautions to avoid injury, that those of us who conduct research make sure that we're responsible for the participants' welfare, and that the research process should take reasonable precautions to avoid causing any type of emotional, physical, or social harm to the participants or clients. So identifying any physical or psychological risks. Is the physical environment potentially harmful or scary to anybody who's participating? Are you showing or talking about material that's age appropriate to the individuals there? Does it have sensitive content in it that might be triggering? So avoid injury in all that we do. To obtain informed consent, hearkening back to that idea of autonomy, that we let participants know the risks and benefits ahead of time and make sure that they are consenting for themselves, that they agree to the research that we're conducting, and that we're very respectful, that they have the right to decline any requests to become research participants, as do we as counselors. And then providing explanations after data collection. I think this one's really key. After we complete the experiment, that we provide participants with full clarification of the nature and what the study was, but then that we also share any results with them. For example, if you're conducting, A/B research on marriage counseling, so you have 2 different types of marriage therapy that you're running couples through, and you want to compare the results of it, and you find that one type of the marital therapy was much more successful or effective than the other, that you share those results with all the clients, all the participants, so that they can make a very informed decision if they want to continue on and maybe pursue the therapy that was the most effective. And then one principle I like to add in here from the American Psychological Association is the idea of taking care of participants after the study. So if you're doing any type of research that could be triggering for clients or bring things up or potentially cause any, physical, psychological, social harm, one, that they know about it ahead of time and agree to it, but 2, that if any of that comes up, that we take care of participants after the study. We don't just thank them and send them on their way, but if there's something physical that happens, that we provide physical medical care. If there's something emotional that happens, that we provide counseling afterwards. So these key principles will just help guide all that we do as researchers and help us evaluate research well. So as a summary assignment for anyone who's watching this video, I would just encourage you to write a 2-page reflection on Milgram's experiment. I list some resources here where you can read a little bit more about it. And then what suggestions you would make, what suggestions for change that you would want Milgram to implement based on the ethical principles that we learned about from the ACA preamble and from Section G in the ACA Code of Ethics. So thank you for taking the time to tune into this video as we covered why research is so important to the field of counseling, that we want to keep doing research, but that we want to do it well. That we talked about a couple experiments there with reactive attachment disorder and rebirthing therapy and Milgram's experiments that really outline the need for these ethical principles to guide all we do. We talked about ethical values in research from the ACA preamble and then also in the Code of Ethics. And I'll provide here just a quick list of further readings. And then also, if anyone wants to get into contact with me, you can reach me at ashlvan@mail.regent.edu. So that's for Ashley Van Bemmelen at Regent University. I look forward to hearing from anyone with questions. Thank you.